The sky bled crimson as the sun sank below the horizon, casting long shadows across the endless Montana prairies. The wind howled, tearing through the tall grasses like a restless spirit, carrying the sharp scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. In the heart of the plain, a massive buffalo stood alone, his silhouette a dark monument against the fiery sky. His name was Stone, a name whispered by the winds that had seen him endure storms and scars. His thick hide bore the marks of battles past, jagged lines from coyote claws, a deep gouge from a hunter's arrow that had long since healed. But it was his eyes, deep and liquid, that held a story no wind could carry, a heart that beat not just for survival, but for something greater. Stone's hooves sank into the soft earth as he lowered his head, his breath steaming in the cooling air. Beneath him, curled in a trembling heap, was a creature so small it seemed impossible it could survive the vastness of this wild place. A tiny, sodden kitten, no bigger than a fist, its black and white fur matted with mud. Its mules were faint, drowned by the wind, but they pierced Stone's ears like a call he could not ignore. The kitten was alone, abandoned by a world that had turned cruel. Stone's massive head tilted, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the horizon. Somewhere out there, danger lurked, not just the storm gathering strength, but something sharper, hungrier. Coyotes. Their yips echoed faintly, carried by the wind. Stone had seen the kitten hours earlier, stumbling through the grass near a crumbling human fence, its tiny body swaying with exhaustion. He had been leading his herd to the safety of higher ground, their hooves pounding a rhythm older than time, when he spotted it. The herd had moved on, their grunts and bellows fading into the distance, but Stone had stopped. Something in the kitten's frail form, in its desperate struggle against the world, had stirred a memory in him, a memory of loss, of a calf he could not save, of a herd that had once looked to him for strength. He had lowered his head then, nudging the kitten gently, urging it to follow. It had, barely, until it collapsed at his feet, too weak to go on. Now, as the first drops of rain stung his hide, Stone stood guard. The kitten was no kin of his, no part of his herd, yet he felt a pull stronger than instinct. He had chosen to stay, to shield this fragile life from the storm and whatever else hunted in the growing dark. His massive frame blocked the wind, his warmth a faint shield against the cold seeping into the ground. But the coyotes were closing in. Their calls grew sharper, their shadows flickering at the edge of the plain. Stone's muscles tensed, his hooves shifting, ready to charge. He would not let them take this life. Miles away, in a weathered ranch house at the edge of the prairie, Ellie Harper sat by a flickering lantern, her hands trembling as she clutched a chipped mug of coffee. The storm was coming, and with it, the memories she fought to bury. Ellie was a ranger, one of the last to patrol these lands, tasked with protecting the wild things that still roamed free. But she felt like a failure. 3 years ago, she had lost her brother Caleb to a fire that swept through their family's land. He had been her anchor, her reason to keep fighting for the prairies when developers and poachers carved away at them. Now, she was alone, her heart as barren as the fields after a drought. The buffalo herds, the coyotes, the hawks, they were all she had left, but even they seemed to slip through her fingers. Poachers had grown bolder, their traps and rifles claiming lives she couldn't save. Ellie's radio crackled, pulling her from her thoughts. "Ellie, you out there?" It was Sam, the old veterinarian who ran the wildlife clinic in town. His voice was rough, urgent. "Got reports of poachers near the North Ridge. Tracks and wire snares. You seen anything?" Ellie's jaw tightened. "Not yet, but I'll check it out." She glanced out the window, where the sky churned with black clouds. "Storm's gonna make it hard to track anything tonight." "Be careful," Sam said. "And keep an eye out for a kitten. Some kid in town said they lost one near the old Miller fence. Probably didn't make it. But a kitten." Ellie's brow furrowed. "Out here. It's coyote bait." "Yeah, well, miracles happen," Sam muttered. "Just thought you should know." Ellie set the mug down, her mind racing. A kitten in the wild didn't stand a chance, not with a storm rolling in and coyotes on the prowl. She grabbed her raincoat and rifle, her boots thudding against the wooden floor as she headed for the door. The prairies were her responsibility, every blade of grass, every life. She couldn't save Caleb, but maybe she could save something tonight. Back on the plain, the rain fell harder, turning the ground to mud. Stone's breath came in heavy snorts, his eyes locked on the shadows moving closer. The coyotes were bold, their hunger sharpened by the lean months. 3 of them, lean and wiry, slunk through the grass, their eyes glinting in the fading light. Stone lowered his head, his horns gleaming with rain, a low rumble building in his chest. He was no stranger to their kind. Years ago, he had fought off a pack to protect his herd, earning the scars that crisscrossed his flanks. But this was different. He wasn't protecting a herd now, but a single, fragile life that meant nothing to the laws of the wild, yet everything to him. The kitten stirred, its tiny body shivering against Stone's hoof. He glanced down, his heart twisting at the sight of its weak movements. It was fighting, just as he was. He snorted softly, nudging it closer to his warmth, then turned his gaze back to the coyotes. They were circling now, testing him. One darted forward, teeth bared, and Stone charged, his hooves thundering against the earth. The coyote yelped, scrambling back, but another lunged from the side, snapping at the air. Stone swung his massive head, catching it with a glancing blow that sent it tumbling. The rain was a curtain now, blurring the world, but Stone's senses were sharp. He could hear the coyotes panting, smell their hunger. He planted himself over the kitten, his body a fortress, his bellow echoing like thunder. The coyotes hesitated, wary of his strength, but they wouldn't leave. Not yet. Ellie's truck rattled along the muddy trail, the wipers struggling against the downpour. The old Miller fence loomed ahead, its rusted posts leaning like ghosts in the storm. She parked and stepped out, her boots sinking into the muck. The wind carried the faint sound of a buffalo's bellow, deep and resonant, cutting through the rain. Her heart quickened. She knew that sound, Stone, the lone bull who roamed these plains. She had seen him before, always at a distance, his massive form a symbol of the wild she fought to protect. But there was something different in his call tonight, something urgent. She grabbed her flashlight and rifle, scanning the darkness. The beam caught movement, coyotes, their eyes reflecting like coins. And then she saw him, Stone, standing like a mountain in the rain, his head lowered, his body shielding something small. Ellie's breath caught. Was that a kitten? She moved closer, her boots slipping in the mud, her heart pounding. The coyotes turned, spotting her, their growls mixing with the storm. Stone's eyes met hers for a moment, and in them, she saw something she couldn't name, resolve, pain, a plea. "Easy, big guy," she whispered, raising her rifle to the sky. She fired a single shot, the cracks splitting the air. The coyotes scattered, their yips fading into the night. Stone didn't move, his gaze still locked on her, as if weighing her intentions. Ellie lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. She took a step forward, then another, until she was close enough to see the kitten nestled against Stone's hoof, its tiny chest rising and falling. "Goddamn," she breathed. "You're protecting it." Stone snorted, his breath a cloud of steam. The rain poured down, soaking Ellie's coat, but she didn't care. She knelt, her hands hovering over the kitten, unsure if Stone would let her near. But he didn't charge, didn't move. He just watched, his eyes deep with something that felt impossibly human. Ellie's radio crackled again. "Ellie, you okay out there?" Sam's voice was faint, distorted by static. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sam, you're not gonna believe this." The storm raged on, the wind screaming, but in that moment, Ellie felt something shift inside her, a spark of hope, faint but alive. She looked at Stone, at the kitten, at the wild heart of the plains beating before her. This was no ordinary night. This was the start of something extraordinary. What would you do to protect a life that wasn't your own? Share this story with someone who believes in the power of unlikely bonds, and let's uncover more tales of the wild together. The rain hammered the Montana prairie, turning the earth into a churning sea of mud. Lightning split the sky, illuminating Stone's massive form as he stood resolute over the tiny kitten, his hooves planted like ancient oaks. The coyotes had fled, scattered by Ellie's gunshot, But the storm was a beast of its own, relentless and unforgiving. The wind tore at Stone's thick fur, each gust carrying the threat of a flood that could swallow the plains whole. His eyes, deep pools of resolve, flicked between the shivering Kitten and the horizon, where the river was swelling, its roar growing louder with every passing minute. The Kitten mewled, a faint sound lost in the storm's fury, but it anchored Stone to this spot. He could have rejoined his herd, safe on the high ground by now, their bellows a distant memory. But the memory of loss, of a calf swept away in a flood years ago, its cries haunting him still, kept him here. He would not abandon this fragile life, no matter how small, no matter how foreign. His massive head lowered, his warm breath stirring the Kitten's sodden fur, urging it to keep fighting. The Kitten stirred, its tiny paws twitching as it pressed closer to his warmth. Ellie Harper crouched a few paces away, her raincoat plastered to her skin, her flashlight beam trembling in the downpour. Her heart raced, torn between awe and fear. She had seen buffalo before, had tracked Stone's herd for years as a ranger, but this was different. Stone wasn't just standing his ground, he was choosing to protect something that didn't belong to his world. The Kitten, barely clinging to life, was a mystery. How had it ended up here, so far from any human settlement? And why was Stone, a creature of raw power, risking everything for it? "All right, big guy," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the storm. "Let's get you both out of this mess." She edged closer, her boots sinking into the mud. Stone's eyes locked onto hers, his massive frame tensing. For a moment, she thought he might charge, his horns gleaming with rain, but he didn't. Instead, he snorted, a low rumble that felt like a warning and a plea all at once. Ellie paused, her hand hovering over the Kitten. "I'm not gonna hurt it," she said softly. "I promise." She reached down, her fingers brushing the Kitten's cold, matted fur. It was so small, its ribs sharp under her touch, its breathing shallow. She scooped it up, cradling it against her chest, and tucked it inside her raincoat to shield it from the rain. Stone watched every move, his eyes never leaving her. "You're one hell of a guardian," she muttered, a faint smile breaking through her fear. She stood, her legs trembling from the cold, and gestured toward the high ground. "Come on, we need to move. The river's rising fast." Stone didn't budge. His hooves sank deeper into the mud, his head lowered as if to say he wasn't leaving this spot, not yet. Ellie frowned, glancing at the horizon. The river was a distant growl, but she knew these plains, knew how quickly a trickle could become a torrent. She had seen floods carve paths through this land, sweeping away everything in their wake. If they didn't move soon, neither Stone nor the Kitten would make it. Miles away, in the wildlife clinic in town, Sam paced the creaking floorboards, his radio clutched tightly. The storm was worse than he'd expected, the kind that turned roads to rivers and cut off the prairie from the world. He'd been a veterinarian for 30 years, seen every kind of creature come through his doors, but the call about a kitten lost near the Miller fence had stuck with him. It was a long shot, but he couldn't shake the image of a child's tear-streaked face, a girl named Lila, barely 10, who had come to him that morning, clutching a photo of her black and white kitten, Whiskers. "She got out," Lila had sobbed. "We were visiting my grandma's farm, and she ran off. Please find her." Sam had promised to try, but he hadn't held much hope. The prairie was no place for a kitten, especially not in a storm like this. Still, he'd called Ellie, knowing she'd be out there, patrolling the wild she loved. Now, her voice crackled through the radio, faint but urgent. "Sam, I found it. The kitten. You're not gonna believe this, but a buffalo's protecting it." Sam stopped pacing, his eyes widening. "A buffalo? You sure?" "Damn sure," Ellie said, her voice cutting through the static. "It's Stone, the big bull from the north herd. He's standing over it like it's his own calf. But the river's rising, and I don't know if I can get them both out." Sam's mind raced. Stone was a legend among the rangers, a bull who had survived poachers, droughts, and fights with rival herds. But protecting a kitten? That was something else. "Ellie, listen," he said, gripping the radio. "If that river breaks its banks, you're all in trouble. Get to high ground. I'm sending backup, but it'll take time in this storm. Backup won't make it in time, Ellie said, her voice tight. I'm on my own out here. Sam cursed under his breath. He knew Ellie was tough, tougher than most, but she was still haunted by her brother's death, still carrying the weight of every life she couldn't save. You're not alone, he said firmly. You've got Stone. And that's no small thing. Back on the plane, Ellie tucked the kitten deeper into her coat, its faint warmth a reminder of why she was here. She looked at Stone, his massive form unyielding against the storm. Come on, you stubborn beast, she said, her voice softer now. You saved this little one. Let me help you save yourself. Stone's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to still. The rain, the wind, the distant roar of the river, it all faded, leaving only the connection between them. Ellie saw something in his gaze, something that echoed her own grief, her own stubborn refusal to give up. She took a step toward the high ground, hoping he'd follow. But then she heard it, a sharp, panicked yip from the darkness. The coyotes were back. Their shapes emerged from the rain, 4 of them now, emboldened by hunger and the chaos of the storm. They slunk low, their eyes glinting, their teeth bared. Stone's head snapped up, his bellow shaking the air. He stepped forward, placing himself between Ellie and the pack, his hooves churning the mud. The kitten stirred against Ellie's chest, its tiny claws digging into her skin. She backed away, her rifle raised, but her hands were shaking. She didn't want to shoot, not unless she had to. These coyotes were just trying to survive, same as her, same as Stone. Stay back, she shouted, firing another shot into the air. The coyotes flinched but didn't retreat. They were too hungry, too desperate. One lunged, its jaws snapping inches from Stone's flank. He swung his head, his horns catching the coyote and tossing it into the mud with a yelp. The others circled, testing him, their growls mixing with the storm. Ellie's heart pounded. She couldn't leave Stone, not now. She scanned the plain, her flashlight catching the glint of water in the distance. The river was closer, its current tearing at the banks. If they didn't move soon, it would cut them off from the high ground. But Stone was focused on the coyotes, his body a wall between them and the kitten in her arms. Stone, we have to go, she shouted, her voice cracking. She took another step toward the high ground, hoping he'd follow. He didn't. Instead, he charged, his hooves thundering, scattering the coyotes once more. But one stayed behind, its eyes locked on Ellie, on the kitten's faint mewls. It crept closer, its body low, ready to strike. Ellie raised her rifle, her finger on the trigger, but her eyes flicked to Stone. He was turning, his bellow a warning, but he was too far to reach her in time. The coyote lunged, and Ellie braced herself, the kitten trembling against her chest. In that moment, she knew she couldn't shoot, not without risking the kitten, not without betraying the wild she'd sworn to protect. What happens when the wild chooses to protect one of its own? Share this story with someone who believes in the strength of unlikely heroes, and let's discover what comes next in the heart of the plains. The coyote's teeth gleamed in the flashlight's beam, its body a blur of hunger as it lunged toward Ellie. The rain stung her face, blurring her vision, but she clutched the kitten tighter against her chest, its tiny heartbeat a fragile pulse beneath her raincoat. Her finger hovered over the rifle's trigger, but she couldn't pull it. Not with the kitten so close, not with Stone's bellow echoing in her ears like a call to hold fast. The world slowed, each raindrop a frozen shard in the storm's chaos, as the coyote's jaws snapped inches from her. Then came a thunderous roar. Not the storm, but Stone. The massive buffalo surged forward, his hooves churning the mud into a froth, his horns lowered like twin scythes. He struck the coyote mid-leap, his head tossing it aside with a force that sent it tumbling into the darkness with a pained yelp. The other coyotes froze, their eyes wide, then scattered into the rain, their courage broken by Stone's fury. He stood panting, his breath steaming in the cold, his eyes burning with a fire that matched the lightning above. Ellie stumbled back, her boots slipping in the mud, her heart hammering. "Jesus, Stone," she gasped, her voice barely audible over the storm. The kitten mewled, its tiny claws pricking her skin, and she tightened her grip, shielding it from the rain. Stone turned to her, his gaze steady, as if to say he wasn't done protecting them. But the river's roar was louder now, a relentless growl that drowned out even the thunder. The water was rising, fast and merciless, its current tearing at the prairie's edge. Ellie could see it in the distance, a dark, churning mass swallowing the grass. "We're out of time," she said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her chest. She gestured toward the high ground, a ridge barely visible through the rain. "Stone, we have to move. Now." But Stone didn't budge. His hooves sank deeper into the mud, his body a stubborn wall against the storm. Ellie's frustration flared. She admired his resolve, but it was going to get them all killed. She took a step closer, her flashlight beam catching the scars on his hide, the rain streaming down his massive frame. He was a creature of the wild, but there was something in his stance, in the way he guarded the kitten, that felt like a choice, not instinct. "Listen to me," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. "You saved this little one. You did that. But if we stay here, none of us make it." She held his gaze, searching those deep, liquid eyes for understanding. For a moment, she thought she saw it, a flicker of recognition, a shared resolve. Then Stone snorted, his head lowering, and he took a single, deliberate step toward the ridge. In the wildlife clinic, Sam sat by the radio, his hands gripping the edge of the table. The storm had knocked out power in half the town, and the clinic's generator hummed faintly, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Lila, the girl who had lost her kitten, sat in the corner, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes red from crying. Sam had let her stay, unable to send her home in this weather, unable to crush her hope. Her small voice broke the silence. "Do you think Whiskers is okay?" Sam forced a smile, though his heart ached. "Ellie's out there, kid. If anyone can find your kitten, it's her." He didn't mention the buffalo, didn't mention the flood or the coyotes. Lila was too young to carry that weight. But her question lingered, tugging at the part of him that had seen too many animals lost to the wild, too many battles he couldn't win. He'd spent years patching up wounded creatures, hawks with broken wings, fawns caught in snares, but this felt different. A buffalo protecting a kitten? It was the kind of story that could make even a cynic like him believe in miracles. The radio crackled, and Ellie's voice came through, strained but alive. "Sam, I've got the kitten. Stone's with me, but the river's breaking. We're heading for the ridge, but it's bad out here." Sam leaned forward, his voice steady. "You're close to the old Miller Trail, right? That ridge is your best shot. There's a shallow crossing up there, but you've gotta hurry. The water's moving fast." "Got it," Ellie said, her voice cutting through the static. "But Stone, he's not moving as fast as I need him to. He's stubborn as hell." Sam chuckled, despite the tension. "Sounds like someone else I know. Keep him moving, Ellie. And watch your back, those coyotes might not be done." Lila's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Is Whiskers okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sam hesitated, then nodded. "Ellie's got her, Lila. She's fighting for her." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. He prayed Ellie could pull this off. On the prairie, Ellie trudged through the mud, the kitten tucked inside her coat, its faint warmth a lifeline. Stone walked beside her now, his massive bulk a shield against the wind, but his steps were slow, deliberate, as if he were measuring the ground for danger. The river was closer, its roar deafening, and Ellie could see the water lapping at the base of the ridge. The crossing Sam had mentioned was just ahead, a narrow stretch where the river was shallower, but the current was fierce, white foam churning over rocks. Ellie's flashlight swept the path, catching glints of water and the faint tracks of stones heard, long since vanished to higher ground. She envied their instincts, their ability to flee without looking back. But Stone wasn't like them. He had stayed, had chosen to protect a life that wasn't his own. It made her think of Caleb, her brother, who had run into the fire to save their horses, who had never come back. She pushed the memory down, focusing on the ridge ahead. She couldn't save Caleb, but she could save Stone and the kitten. "Almost there," she said, more to herself than to Stone. But then she heard it, a low, guttural growl, not from the coyotes, but from something else. Her flashlight swung toward the sound, and her breath caught. A snare, its wire glinting in the rain, was tangled in the grass just ahead. It was a poacher's trap, crude but deadly, designed to catch anything that stepped into it. And beyond it, partially hidden by the rain, was another danger. A fallen tree, swept by the flood, teetering on the riverbank, its roots clawing at the air. "Damn it," Ellie muttered, her heart sinking. The snare was directly in their path, and the tree could come crashing down at any moment. She looked at Stone, his eyes fixed on the snare, his body tensing as if he sensed the trap's malice. The kitten stirred, its mules growing weaker, and Ellie's resolve hardened. They had to get through, but one wrong step could end it all. Stone snorted, his hooves shifting, and took a step forward, his massive frame brushing past Ellie. She grabbed at his side, her hand sinking into his wet fur. "No, wait," she shouted. "You'll get caught." But Stone didn't stop. He moved toward the snare, his head lowered, his eyes scanning the ground. Ellie's stomach twisted. She'd seen animals lose limbs to traps like this, seen them bleed out in the mud. But Stone's steps were careful, deliberate, as if he understood the danger. He paused, his hoof hovering over the wire, then stepped over it, his massive body clearing the trap with inches to spare. Ellie exhaled, her hands shaking. "You're insane," she said, half laughing, half crying. She followed, stepping carefully where Stone had, the kitten clutched tight. But as they reached the crossing, the ground shook beneath them. The fallen tree groaned, its roots snapping as the river's current tugged at it. Ellie froze, her flashlight beam catching the tree as it began to slide, its branches clawing at the air like a dying beast. "Stone, move!" she screamed, but the buffalo was already turning, his body shielding her from the falling tree. The world exploded into chaos, wood splintering, water roaring, and Stone's bellow shaking the air. Ellie stumbled, the kitten slipping in her grasp, and for a moment, she thought they were done for. What does it take to stand against the storm? Share this story with someone who believes in the courage of the wild, and let's find out what happens next in the heart of the plains. The tree crashed toward the earth, its branches clawing through the rain like a beast unleashed. Ellie's scream caught in her throat as she stumbled back, the kitten slipping in her rain-slicked hands. Stone's bellow drowned out the storm, his massive body surging forward to shield her, his hooves sinking into the mud as the tree's shadow loomed. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then the tree slammed into the ground, its roots tangling in the riverbank, missing Stone by inches. Mud and water sprayed, soaking Ellie's face, but she clung to the kitten, its faint mules a lifeline in the chaos. "Stone!" she gasped, her voice raw. The buffalo stood firm, his flanks heaving, his eyes blazing with defiance. The fallen tree had blocked the shallow crossing, its branches jutting into the raging river like jagged teeth. The water was higher now, lapping at the ridge's base, its current a relentless force that could sweep them away in seconds. Ellie's flashlight beam trembled, catching the glint of the poacher's snare they'd narrowly avoided, still glinting in the grass like a predator lying in wait. Stone snorted, his breath steaming in the cold, and turned to face her. His gaze was steady, unyielding, as if he were urging her to keep moving, to trust him. Ellie's chest tightened, part awe, part fear. She'd spent years tracking wildlife, but she'd never seen anything like this, a buffalo risking everything for a creature so small, so foreign to his world. The kitten stirred against her, its tiny body shivering, and Ellie's resolve hardened. "All right," she whispered, tucking it deeper into her coat. "We're getting out of this. Together." She scanned the ridge, searching for another path. The river had swallowed the shallow crossing, and the fallen tree made it impassable. But to the left, a narrow ledge wound up the ridge, slick with mud but just wide enough for Stone's massive frame. It was a risk, the ledge was steep, and one slip could send them into the flood, but staying here wasn't an option. The river was rising, and the coyotes' distant yips echoed through the storm, a reminder that danger still lurked. "Up there," Ellie said, pointing her flashlight at the ledge. She took a step, her boots slipping, and glanced back at Stone. "You with me?" He snorted again, his head lowering as if in agreement, and began to move, his hooves carving deep grooves in the mud. Ellie followed, her heart pounding, the kitten's faint warmth a constant reminder of why she couldn't give up. In the wildlife clinic, Sam hunched over the radio, his knuckles white. The storm had worsened, the wind rattling the clinic's windows, and the generator's hum was faltering. Lila sat curled in the corner, clutching the photo of her kitten, her eyes wide with hope and fear. Sam had tried to distract her with stories of the animals he'd saved, owls, deer, even a fox cub, but her focus never wavered. "Is Whiskers coming home?" she asked, her voice small. Sam swallowed hard, his throat tight. He wanted to promise her everything would be okay, but he'd seen too much of the wild to make promises he couldn't keep. "Ellie's doing everything she can," he said, forcing a smile. "And she's got help out there. A real big helper." Lila's brow furrowed. "Like a dog." Sam chuckled, despite the tension. "Bigger. A buffalo named Stone. He's looking out for Whiskers, just like Ellie is." Lila's eyes widened, a spark of wonder breaking through her fear. "A buffalo? Like in the movies?" "Better," Sam said. "This one's real." He turned back to the radio, his smile fading as static crackled. "Ellie, you there? What's your status?" The radio hissed, then Ellie's voice came through, breathless and strained. "Sam, the crossing's gone. Tree came down, nearly took us out. We're trying a ledge up the ridge, but it's slick as hell. Stone's leading the way." Sam's heart sank. He knew that ridge, steep, treacherous, and now a muddy death trap in the storm. "Ellie, that ledge is no joke. If the river's that high, you've got maybe 20 minutes before it floods the whole damn plain." "I know," Ellie snapped, her voice sharp with urgency. "But I'm not leaving them. Stones, he's not just protecting the kitten, Sam. He's protecting me." Sam leaned back, his mind reeling. A buffalo protecting a human? He'd heard stories, legends of animals doing extraordinary things, but this was something else. "Just get to the ridge," he said. "I'm calling in a chopper, but it'll take time in this weather. Hold on, Ellie." "Holding," she said, and the radio went silent. Lila tugged at Sam's sleeve, her voice trembling. "Is the buffalo gonna save Whiskers?" Sam met her gaze, his heart aching. If anyone can, it's him. On the ridge, Ellie clung to the rocky ledge, her boots slipping on the slick stone. Stone moved ahead, his massive body a steady presence, his hooves finding purchase where hers couldn't. The kitten was still, its breathing faint, and Ellie whispered to it, her voice a desperate prayer. "Hang on, little one. We're almost there." The wind howled, tearing at her coat, and the river roared below, its waters clawing at the ledge like a living thing. Stone paused, his head turning to scan the darkness. His ears twitched, catching a sound Ellie couldn't hear over the storm. She followed his gaze, her flashlight beam cutting through the rain. Then she saw it, a figure, human, crouched in the shadows near the ledge's end. A poacher, his face hidden by a hood, his hands working to set another snare. Ellie's blood ran cold. The traps weren't random, they were deliberate, a network designed to catch anything that fled the flood. And Stone was heading right for one. "Stone, stop!" she shouted, her voice swallowed by the wind. She scrambled forward, her boots slipping, and grabbed at his flank. He froze, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, she thought he understood. But then the poacher looked up, his eyes glinting in the flashlight's beam. He stood, a rifle in his hands, and Ellie's heart stopped. She knew that look, cold, calculating, the kind of man who saw the wild as nothing but profit. "Hey!" she yelled, raising her own rifle, the kitten still clutched against her chest. "Drop it. Now." The poacher smirked, his voice carrying over the storm. "You're out of your depth, Ranger. That bull's worth a fortune. Step aside, and maybe I let you keep the cat." Stone snorted, his hooves shifting, his body tensing as if he sensed the threat. Ellie's mind raced. She was alone, outgunned, with a dying kitten and a buffalo who wouldn't back down. The poacher raised his rifle, aiming at Stone, and Ellie's world narrowed to a single choice: protect them or lose them both. She stepped in front of Stone, her rifle steady despite the trembling in her hands. "You're not touching him," she said, her voice steel. "Not tonight." The poacher laughed, his finger tightening on the trigger. Stone's bellow shook the air, and Ellie braced herself, the kitten's faint heartbeat the only thing keeping her grounded. Lightning flashed, illuminating the ridge, and in that moment, everything hung in the balance. What does it mean to stand for something greater than yourself? Share this story with someone who believes in the fight for the wild, and let's see what choices define the heart of the plains. Lightning seared the sky, casting the poacher's face in stark relief, his sneer sharp, his eyes glinting with greed. The rain pounded the narrow ledge, turning it into a slick ribbon of mud and stone, where Ellie stood, rifle raised, the kitten's faint warmth pressed against her chest. Stone's massive form loomed beside her, his breath steaming, his horns lowered like a warrior's shield. The poacher's rifle was trained on the buffalo, its barrel steady despite the storm's fury. The river roared below, its waters clawing at the ridge, ready to claim anything that fell. "You're making a mistake, Ranger," the poacher shouted, his voice cutting through the wind. "That bull's hide'll fetch more than you make in a year. Walk away, and I'll let you keep the cat." Ellie's jaw tightened, her fingers steady on the trigger. She could feel Stone's tension, his muscles coiled, his eyes locked on the poacher. The kitten stirred, its mewls barely audible, but each one was a reminder of why she was here, of why Stone was here. "He's not yours to take," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Not him, not the kitten, not this land." The poacher laughed, a harsh sound swallowed by the storm. "Big words for someone out here alone." He shifted his aim, the rifle's barrel glinting as it pointed at Ellie's chest. Her heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She'd faced death before, 3 years ago, when the fire took Caleb, when she'd stood helpless as the flames devoured everything she loved. She wouldn't be helpless now. Stone snorted, his hooves shifting, and Ellie felt the ground tremble beneath his weight. He took a step forward, placing himself between her and the poacher, his massive body a living wall. The poacher's smirk faltered, his eyes flicking to Stone's horns, to the raw power in his stance. "You think that beast'll save you," he sneered, but his voice cracked, betraying his fear. "He already has," Ellie said, her voice steady. She lowered her rifle slightly, not out of surrender, but to show Stone she trusted him. "You're the one who's alone out here." The poacher's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, Stone charged. His bellow shook the ridge, his hooves thundering against the slick stone. The poacher stumbled back, his shot going wild, the crack of the rifle lost in the storm. Stone's horns caught the man's leg, not goring but shoving, sending him sprawling into the mud. The rifle flew from his hands, skidding toward the river's edge, where the current snatched it away. Ellie seized the moment, scrambling forward, her boots slipping as she kept the kitten secure. She aimed her rifle at the poacher, now sprawled and cursing in the mud. "Stay down," she shouted, her voice cutting through the rain. "You move, and I won't stop him next time." The poacher froze, his eyes wide with fear as Stone loomed over him, snorting, his breath a cloud of steam. For a moment, Ellie thought Stone might finish it, trample the man who'd threatened them all. But the buffalo paused, his eyes meeting hers, and in them, she saw not rage, but something deeper, a choice to protect, not destroy. He stepped back, his massive form still shielding Ellie and the kitten, his presence a warning more powerful than any bullet. "I end the wildlife clinic," Sam paced, the radio silent except for static. Lila sat clutching her kitten's photo, her small hands trembling. The storm had cut off communication, the generator flickering as the wind howled outside. Sam's mind raced, picturing Ellie out there, alone with a buffalo and a poacher. He'd seen poachers before, men who'd kill anything for a profit, but he'd also seen Ellie's resolve, her refusal to give up on the wild. And Stone, that buffalo was something else entirely. "Lila," he said, kneeling beside her, his voice gentle. "You know why Ellie's out there? Because she believes in saving things, even when it's hard. Your Whiskers is lucky to have her." "And the buffalo?" Lila asked, her eyes searching his. "Is he helping Whiskers?" Sam nodded, his throat tight. "Yeah, kid. He's helping. More than you can imagine. The radio crackled, and Ellie's voice broke through, breathless but alive. Sam, I've got the poacher down. Stone, he took care of it. We're past the snare, but the ledge is crumbling. The kitten's weak, Sam. I don't know if it'll make it. Sam gripped the radio, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. You're almost to the ridge's top, Ellie. There's a flat stretch up there, safe from the flood. Get there, and I'll have a chopper waiting as soon as this storm breaks. Working on it, Ellie said, her voice strained. But the poacher, he's not alone. I saw tracks, more of them, heading this way. Sam's blood ran cold. Poachers didn't work alone, not out here. Ellie, you listen to me, he said. You've got Stone, and you've got that kitten counting on you. Keep moving. I'm calling in every ranger I can reach. Lila tugged at his sleeve, her voice small. Are they gonna be okay? Sam forced a smile, though his heart was heavy. They're fighters, Lila. All of them. On the ledge, Ellie tucked the kitten deeper into her coat, its breathing faint but stubborn. Stone led the way, his hooves finding purchase on the slick stone, his body a guide through the storm. The poacher lay behind them, groaning in the mud, but Ellie's focus was on the path ahead, and the tracks she'd seen, fresh prints in the mud, leading toward the ridge's top. More poachers, likely armed, likely waiting. Her rifle felt heavy in her hands, her body aching from the cold, but she kept moving, driven by the kitten's faint heartbeat and Stone's unyielding presence. The ledge narrowed, the river roaring below, its waters now lapping at the stone. Ellie's flashlight caught the glint of another snare ahead, its wire taut and deadly. Stone, hold up, she called, her voice sharp. He paused, his ears twitching, his eyes scanning the trap. Ellie's heart sank. The snare was set across the only path, its wire nearly invisible in the rain. She could disarm it, but it would take time, and the poacher's tracks meant time was something they didn't have. She knelt, her hands shaking as she examined the snare. The kitten stirred, its mules weaker now, and Ellie's chest tightened. Hang on, little one, she whispered, her fingers fumbling with the wire. Stone stood over her, his body shielding her from the wind, his warmth a faint comfort in the cold. She worked quickly, her ranger training kicking in, but the wire was stubborn, its mechanism rusted but strong. Then she heard it, a low whistle, human, cutting through the storm. Her head snapped up, her flashlight sweeping the ridge. Shadows moved at the top, two figures, their rifles glinting. The poacher's allies, closing in. Ellie's pulse raced, her hands frozen on the snare. Stone snorted, his hooves shifting, his body tensing as if he sensed the new threat. The kitten's heartbeat faltered, a faint stutter against her chest, and Ellie's world narrowed to a single truth: they were running out of time. She looked at Stone, his eyes meeting hers, and in that moment, she knew they'd have to make a choice: face the poachers, or risk the snare and the flood. Either way, the wild was testing them, and the answer lay in the heart of the plains. What does it take to protect the fragile in a world of predators? Share this story with someone who believes in the strength of unlikely allies, and let's uncover what lies at the top of the ridge. The whistle pierced the storm's roar, sharp and deliberate, a signal from the shadows atop the ridge. Ellie's hands froze on the poacher's snare, the wire biting into her fingers as her flashlight beam caught the glint of rifles in the distance. Two figures moved through the rain, their forms blurred but purposeful, closing in on the narrow ledge where she knelt. Stone's massive frame loomed over her, his breath steaming, his eyes fixed on the approaching threat. The kitten's faint heartbeat fluttered against Ellie's chest, weaker now, a fragile thread tethering her to this moment. The river roared below, its waters clawing at the ledge, while the snare's taut wire gleamed like a trap set by the wild itself. Ellie's mind raced. The snare was seconds from being disarmed, but the poachers were closer, their footsteps crunching on the wet stone. She could hear their voices now, low and urgent, planning their move. Stone snorted, his hooves shifting, his body a wall between her and the danger above. His scars, etched deep in his hide, told a story of battles won, but this was no ordinary fight. The kitten, the flood, the poachers, it was all converging, and Ellie felt the weight of it pressing down, heavier than the storm. Stay with me, Stone, she whispered, her voice trembling as she worked the snare's mechanism. The wire snapped free, coiling into the mud, and she exhaled, her hands shaking. But there was no time to celebrate. The poachers were almost upon them, their rifles raised, their voices clearer now. "That's the bull," one shouted, his tone greedy. "Take him down, and we're set." Ellie stood, her rifle in one hand, the kitten tucked inside her coat with the other. "Stone, we move now," she said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her. She stepped over the disarmed snare, her boots slipping on the slick ledge, and gestured toward the ridge's top. Stone followed, his hooves steady where hers faltered, his presence a quiet strength that anchored her. The ledge widened slightly, offering a brief respite, but the poachers were closing in, their flashlights cutting through the rain like knives. In the wildlife clinic, Sam's hands gripped the radio, his knuckles white as static crackled. The storm had turned the night into a war zone, the wind rattling the windows, the generator flickering. Lila sat in the corner, her small hands clutching the photo of her kitten, her eyes wide with hope and dread. Sam had tried to keep her calm, but his own heart was racing. Ellie was out there, facing poachers, a flood, and a buffalo who seemed to defy the laws of the wild. "Ellie, come in." Sam barked into the radio, his voice rough. "What's happening?" Her voice broke through, breathless and sharp. "Sam, I've got 2 more poachers on the ridge. The snare's down, but they're armed, and they want Stone. The kitten's fading, Sam. I need that chopper." Sam cursed under his breath, glancing at the storm outside. "Chopper's grounded until the wind dies down. You're 10 minutes from the ridge's top. There's a flat clearing there, safe from the flood. Get there, Ellie. I'm calling every ranger in the county." Lila's voice cut through, small but fierce. "Is Whiskers okay? Is the buffalo saving her?" Sam knelt beside her, his heart aching. "Whiskers is fighting, Lila. And Stone, he's doing more than saving her. He's saving them all." He turned back to the radio, his voice steady. "Ellie, you've got this. Trust Stone. He's not just a buffalo, he's something else." On the ridge, Ellie's flashlight swept the path ahead, catching the poachers' shadows as they descended. Stone's bellow shook the air, a warning that stopped them in their tracks. The lead poacher, a wiry man with a scarred face, raised his rifle, his eyes locked on Stone. "Big mistake, Ranger," he called, his voice cold. "That bull's mine." Ellie stepped forward, her rifle raised, the kitten's faint warmth grounding her. "He's nobody's," she said, her voice steel. "Back off, or you'll answer to more than me." The poacher laughed, but his partner hesitated, his eyes flicking to Stone's massive form. "He's just an animal," the lead poacher sneered, stepping closer. "You think he'll save you?" Stone's hooves scraped the stone, his head lowering, his horns glinting in the rain. Ellie felt a surge of something, pride, maybe, or faith, in the buffalo who'd chosen to stand with her. "He already has," she said, echoing her words from before. She fired a warning shot into the air, the cracks splitting the storm. The poachers flinched, but the leader held his ground, his rifle steady. Then Stone moved. Not a charge, but a deliberate step forward, his eyes locked on the poacher, his presence a force that seemed to bend the storm itself. The leader's smirk faltered, his rifle wavering. "Crazy beast," he muttered, but his voice trembled. He took a step back, then another, his partner following, their flashlights shaking in the rain. Ellie seized the chance, moving up the ledge, Stone at her side. The ridge's top was close now, a flat clearing just beyond the next rise, but the ground was crumbling, mud and stone sliding into the river below. The kitten's breathing was faint, almost gone, and Ellie's heart twisted. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking. She glanced at Stone, his eyes steady, and knew he was fighting for the same thing she was. A life that shouldn't matter to him, but did. The poachers regrouped, their voices rising in anger as they followed, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Ellie's flashlight caught something new, a glint of metal ahead, another snare, this one larger, its jaws designed for something as big as Stone. Her stomach dropped. The poachers had planned this, herding them toward a trap they couldn't avoid. The ledge was too narrow to turn back, the river too close to escape. "Stone, stop," she said, her voice urgent. He paused, his ears twitching, his eyes scanning the trap. Ellie knelt, her hands fumbling in the mud, but the snare was different. Complex, reinforced, meant to hold a beast like Stone. She worked frantically, her fingers numb, the poacher's footsteps growing louder. Stone stood over her, his body shielding her from the wind, his warmth a faint comfort against the cold. The lead poacher's voice rang out, closer now. "No way out, Ranger. That bull's ours." Ellie's hands shook, the snare's mechanism resisting her efforts. The kitten's heartbeat faltered, a faint stutter against her chest, and Stone's eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. She knew they were out of time. The poachers, the snare, the flood were closing in, and the ridge's top was their only hope. But the snare stood in their way, a final test of the wild's merciless heart. What does it mean to face a trap with no escape? Share this story with someone who believes in the power of defiance, and let's discover what lies beyond the snare. The snare's metal jaws gleamed in the rain, a cruel trap set in the narrowing ledge's path, its wires taut and unyielding. Ellie's fingers fumbled with the mechanism, her hands numb from the cold, the kitten's faint heartbeat stuttering against her chest. Stone stood over her, his massive bulk shielding her from the storm's fury, his breath steaming as his eyes scanned the darkness. The poachers' flashlights cut through the rain, their voices growing louder, their footsteps crunching closer on the slick stone. The river roared below, its waters clawing at the ridge, ready to swallow them whole. Time was slipping away, and the clearing at the ridge's top, so close now, felt impossibly far. "Damn it," Ellie muttered, her voice shaking as the snare's mechanism resisted her efforts. This trap was different, heavier, designed to hold a beast like Stone, its wires reinforced with a malice that spoke of the poacher's greed. She glanced up, her flashlight catching the glint of their rifles, now only yards away. The lead poacher's voice rang out, sharp and triumphant. "End of the line, Ranger. That bull's ours, and you're out of moves." Stone snorted, his hooves scraping the stone, his body tensing as if he sensed the trap's threat and the men closing in. Ellie's heart pounded, her mind racing. The kitten's breathing was barely there, a faint whisper against her skin, and she knew they were running out of time. She looked at Stone, his eyes meeting hers, deep and resolute, and in that moment, she felt a connection that transcended species, a shared defiance, a refusal to let the wild's heart be broken. "Stone," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear. "We're not done yet." She abandoned the snare, knowing she couldn't disarm it in time, and stood, her rifle raised, the kitten tucked tight inside her coat. The poachers were close now, their flashlights blinding, their rifles aimed at Stone's massive frame. Ellie stepped in front of him, her body a frail shield compared to his, but her resolve unyielding. "You want him, you go through me," she said, her voice cutting through the storm. The lead poacher laughed, his scarred face twisting. "Big mistake, lady." He raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Stone moved. Not toward the poachers, but toward the snare. His massive hoof hovered over the trap, then stomped down, deliberate and precise, triggering the mechanism. The wires snapped shut, but Stone's strength was too much. The metal groaned, bending under his weight, the trap breaking apart in a shower of sparks and twisted steel. Ellie's breath caught, her eyes wide. "Stone, you." She didn't finish. The poachers shouted, their rifles firing wildly, the shots cracking through the storm. Stone bellowed, his body lurching as a bullet grazed his flank, blood mixing with the rain. But he didn't falter. He charged forward, his horns lowered, scattering the poachers like leaves in the wind. The leader stumbled, his rifle falling, and his partner fled, disappearing into the darkness. Ellie seized the moment, scrambling past the broken snare, her boots slipping on the slick stone. Stone followed, his steps heavy, a faint limp in his gait from the graze. The ridge's top was just ahead, a flat clearing bathed in the storm's faint glow, but the ground was crumbling, mud and rocks sliding into the river below. Ellie's flashlight swept the path, catching the glint of another trap, smaller, but still deadly. She cursed, her heart sinking. The poachers had turned the ridge into a gauntlet, and they weren't done. In the wildlife clinic, Sam stood by the radio, his hands trembling as static crackled. Lila clutched her kitten's photo, her small voice breaking the silence. "Are they okay, Sam? Is Whiskers coming home?" Sam's throat tightened. He wanted to shield her from the truth, but her eyes demanded honesty. "Ellie's fighting, Lila," he said, his voice rough. "And Stone's fighting too. They're doing everything they can for Whiskers." He turned back to the radio, his voice urgent. "Ellie, come in. What's happening?" Her voice broke through, breathless and strained. "Sam, Stone broke the snare. Took a graze, but he's still with me. Poachers are down, but there's another trap ahead, and the kitten's fading fast. We're almost at the clearing, but the ridge is falling apart." Sam's heart raced. He knew the ridge's terrain, unstable even in good weather, a death trap in this storm. "Ellie, you're close. The clearing's safe from the flood. Get there, and hold tight. Choppers on standby, but the wind's still too strong." "Trying," Ellie said, her voice cracking. "But these traps, they're everywhere. And I think more poachers are out there." Sam cursed, glancing at the storm outside. He'd called every ranger he could reach, but the roads were flooded, and the chopper was grounded. "You've got Stone," he said, gripping the radio. "And you've got that Kitten counting on you. Keep moving, Ellie." Lila tugged at his sleeve, her eyes wide. "The buffalo's hurt?" Sam nodded, his heart heavy. "Yeah, but he's tough. Tougher than anyone I know." On the ridge, Ellie's boots sank into the mud, the clearing just yards away. Stone limped beside her, blood trickling from his flank, but his eyes were steady, his presence unyielding. The kitten's heartbeat was faint, almost gone, and Ellie's chest ached with the weight of it. She swept her flashlight across the path, spotting the smaller trap, a wire noose, hidden in the grass. She knelt, her hands shaking, and worked to disarm it, her fingers slipping on the wet metal. Stone stood over her, his body shielding her from the wind, his blood mixing with the rain. Ellie's hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the realization of what Stone had done. He'd broken the first snare, taken a bullet, and still he stood, protecting her and the kitten. She thought of Caleb, of his final run into the fire, and tears stung her eyes. "You're not giving up," she whispered, to Stone, to the kitten, to herself. "Neither am I." The trap's wire snapped free, and Ellie stood, her rifle ready, her eyes scanning the darkness. The poachers were out there, she could hear their shouts, faint but growing closer. The clearing was in sight, a flat expanse of stone and grass, safe from the flood, but the path was treacherous, the ground crumbling under their weight. Stone's limp worsened, his breath labored, but he kept moving, his hooves steady where hers faltered. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement in the clearing, another figure, not a poacher but something else. A child, small and soaked, standing in the rain, clutching a flashlight. Ellie's heart stopped. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice hoarse. "Get out of here. It's not safe." The child turned, her face pale, her eyes wide. "Whiskers!" she cried, her voice breaking. It was Lila, the girl from the clinic, somehow here, alone in the storm. Ellie's mind reeled. How had she gotten here? But there was no time to question. The poachers' shouts were closer, their flashlights cutting through the rain, and the ridge was crumbling, the river rising. Stone bellowed, his eyes locking on Lila, and he stepped forward, his body shielding the path to the clearing. Ellie ran toward the girl, the kitten clutched tight, her heart pounding. The wild was testing them all, and the final choice was coming. Save themselves, or risk everything for a child who shouldn't be here. What does it take to protect the innocent in a world that spares no one? Share this story with someone who believes in the courage of the heart, and let's find out what lies in the clearing. The rain lashed the ridge, a merciless curtain that blurred the world into shades of gray and shadow. Ellie's boots skidded on the slick stone as she ran toward Lila, the girl's small form trembling in the clearing, her flashlight beam wavering like a fading star. The kitten, Whiskers, lay still against Ellie's chest, its heartbeat a faint whisper, barely clinging to life. Stone limped beside her, his flank bloodied from the poacher's bullet, his massive frame a shield against the storm and the shouts of the poachers closing in. The river roared below, its waters swallowing the ledge, and the clearing, their last hope, was a battlefield of mud and desperation. "Lila!" Ellie shouted, her voice raw over the wind. "What are you doing here?" The girl's eyes were wide, tears mixing with rain as she clutched her flashlight, her small body shaking. "I had to find Whiskers," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "I couldn't wait." Ellie's heart twisted. Lila must have slipped away from the clinic, driven by a child's fierce love, and now she was here, in the heart of the storm, with poachers on their heels. Stone's bellow shook the air, his hooves scraping the stone as he positioned himself between Lila and the path where the poachers' flashlights flickered. Ellie knelt beside the girl, her hands trembling as she checked the kitten. Its breathing was faint, its body cold, but it was alive. "Lila, stay close," she said, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her. She handed the kitten to the girl, who clutched it to her chest, her sobs quieting as she felt its faint warmth. The poachers' shouts grew louder, their flashlights cutting through the rain. "There they are!" the lead poacher yelled, his voice thick with greed. "Get the bull!" Ellie raised her rifle, her hands steady despite the exhaustion, but she knew they were outnumbered. The clearing was wide, but exposed, with no cover except Stone's massive form. The buffalo snorted, his eyes blazing, his limp more pronounced but his resolve unbroken. He'd broken a snare, taken a bullet, and now he stood guard over a child and a kitten, defying the wild's brutal logic. Ellie's radio crackled, Sam's voice breaking through. "Ellie, chopper's coming. 5 minutes out. Hold the clearing." 5 minutes was an eternity, but it was hope. Ellie glanced at Stone, his blood mixing with the rain, and made her choice. "Stone, we hold here," she said, her voice a vow. She turned to Lila, her eyes fierce. "Stay behind him, Lila. No matter what." The poachers emerged from the rain, 3 now, their rifles raised. The leader, his face scarred and twisted, smirked as he aimed at Stone. "Last chance, Ranger," he called. "Step aside, or you're all done." Ellie didn't move, her rifle steady. Lila huddled behind her, clutching Whiskers. Stone lowered his head, his horns glinting, and charged. The world erupted, Stone's hooves thundered, the poachers fired, and Ellie dove to shield Lila, her body covering the girl and the kitten. A bullet grazed her shoulder, pain searing through her, but she held fast, her rifle firing a warning shot that sent one poacher scrambling. Stone's charge scattered the others, his horns catching the leader's arm, sending him sprawling with a scream. The buffalo's bellow was a roar of defiance, his bloodied flank heaving, but he didn't stop. He stood over Ellie, Lila, and Whiskers, a fortress of fur and will. The chopper's hum broke through the storm, its spotlight cutting through the rain, illuminating the clearing. The poachers froze, their resolve crumbling as the chopper descended, its blades a roar that drowned out the river. Rangers spilled out, rifles raised, shouting commands. The poachers dropped their weapons, their hands raised in surrender, their greed no match for the wild's heart. Ellie collapsed to her knees, her shoulder burning, Lila clinging to her. Whiskers stirred, its mules stronger now, warmed by Lila's touch. Stone stood panting, his eyes meeting Ellie's, a silent understanding passing between them. He'd chosen to protect, to sacrifice, and now they were safe. Days later, the storm had passed, leaving the Montana prairie golden under a clear sky. Ellie sat in the wildlife clinic, her shoulder bandaged, watching Lila cradle Whiskers, now cleaned and fed, purring softly. Sam stood beside her, his eyes soft with relief. "You did it, Ellie," he said, his voice rough. "You and Stone." Ellie nodded, her throat tight. She thought of Stone, now recovering in a protected reserve, his wounds tended by Sam's team. The poachers were in custody, their traps dismantled, their network exposed by the Ranger's sweep. But it was Stone's choice, to stand for a kitten, for a child, for her. That lingered, a story etched into the plains. Lila looked up, her eyes bright. "Stone's a hero, isn't he?" "Yeah," Ellie said, her voice soft. "The biggest." She thought of Caleb, of the fire she couldn't stop, and felt a weight lift. She hadn't saved him, but she'd saved this. Whiskers, Lila, Stone. It was enough. The prairie carried Stone's story, whispered in the wind, carved in the tracks that led to the ridge. A small marker stood there now, placed by the Rangers, A stone etched with a buffalo's silhouette, a tribute to a heart that defied the wild. Ellie visited it often, her hand tracing the carving, her heart full of a truth she'd learned. Love, not instinct, was the strongest force of all. What moment in your life showed you the power of a choice made from love? Share this story with someone who believes in the unbreakable bonds of the wild, and let Stone's legacy live on.